The children of Aule, the greatest smiths and craftsmen, the most resilient, the dwarves. Dwarves were 4.5 to 5 feet tall, and they had beards from the beginning of their lives, regardless of whether they were male or female. Dwarves could die of shame if they were subjected to shaving. Dwarves were very greedy also, and this led to many issues throughout their history, especially with the elves. Dwarves lived far from the sea and disliked boats just as much as they were afraid of the sounds of the ocean. Dwarves of course enjoyed the works of their hands above all else. They were considered unrivaled in smithing, metalworking, and masonry, even by the Noldoran elves, who were the most beloved of Aule. They built Menegroth, Nargothrond, Khazad-dûm, Thranduil's halls, and Erebor, although some of these places the elves later refined after the dwarves delved them. Dwarves, as created by Aule, are strong and resilient to fire and evil. They were made to survive the troubles that Melkor would bring upon the world. They are secretive, stubborn, and steadfast in enmity or loyalty. Dwarves are also immune to human diseases, although they can get fat and lose physical ability as they age. The dwarves weren't corrupted by wearing the 7 rings. The 7 dwarven rings only increased their lust for gold and treasure. The Longbeards were the most long-lived of the dwarves. By the end of the 3rd Age, they lived on average 250 years. Dwalin, the son of Fundin, and one of Thorn's company, lived 340 years. Dwarves were considered youth until they were 30. By 40, dwarves gained the appearance they had for most of their lives. Between 40 and 240, the dwarves were in the prime of their lives. They gained aged appearances only about 10 years before their death. Dwarves didn't have friendly relationships with animals. They didn't even keep dogs and would never mount a horse willingly. Dwarves didn't enjoy the labor of farming and instead traded with men in later years for their food and lumber. There were 7 types of dwarves, the Blacklocks and the Stonefists of the Orokarni Mountains in the east, the Ironfists and the Stiffbeards also from the same place, the Firebeards and the Broadbeams of the Blue Mountains, from the cities of Nogrod and Belegost, and Durins folk, originally from Gundabad, but who lived all across Rovanion in Khazad-dûm, the Iron Hills, Thorin's Halls in Ered Luin, the Grey Mountains, Erebor, and even in Enedwaith. The Blacklocks, Stonefoots, Ironfists, and Stiffbeards all lived in the far east in the land known as Rhûn. They lived in the Orokarni, the Red Mountains. These dwarves founded kingdoms in the land that was not written about much throughout Tolkien's works. In the First Age, it is said that some men met the dwarves there after they awoke at Hildorian. However, these dwarves had fallen under the shadow and were of evil mind and were distrustful of their race. In the Third Age, the noble dwarves of the east journeyed from Rhûn to join other dwarf clans in the War of the Dwarves and Orcs. After the war, the survivors returned to their halls. Late in the Third Age, there was war and conflict and strife in Rhûn. Dwarves left their halls in the Orokarni and went into western lands of Eriador, where some of them actually met Frodo Baggins. The Firebeards and Broadbeams lived in the Blue Mountains of Ered Luin, where the 2 dwarven fathers awoke under Mount Dulmed. These 2 dwarven fathers were younger than Durin, but were also the second oldest of all of the dwarven fathers. The 2 great city-states of these dwarves were Nogrod and Belegost. Although the Firebeards and Broadbeams were 2 separate clans, it is not said that they dwelt in separate cities. It is likely they mingled together among the 2. Wandering elves in Osiriand, to the west of the Blue Mountains in the First Age, would hunt within the Ered Luin. At the end of the First Age, during the War of Wrath, the Blue Mountains were destroyed, and of the lands that remained, Lindon was founded, and High King Gil-galad ruled the elves there. Most of the dwarves went east to Khazad-dûm, as their cities were destroyed when the world was changed. Some dwarves remained directly to the east of the Blue Mountains afterwards. The dwarves of Belegost had better relations with the elves than those of Nogrod, and helped build Menegroth for King Thingol in the First Age. The only notable dwarf of Nogrod was Telchar the Smith, who had forged Narsil, the Sword of Elendil, the Dragon Helm of Hador, and Angrist, the Knife of Beren. The most notable dwarf of Belegost was Azaghal, who died in battle against Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs, beside the Noldoran elves. The Longbeards are also known as Durin's folk. Durin the Deathless was the eldest of the dwarf fathers. He awoke at Mount Gundabad. Durin's kingdom was called Khazad-dûm, later named Moria. Mithril was found in Khazad-dûm and was the most precious resource of the dwarves. Durin's folk colonized the Iron Hills early in their history and built the Dwarf Road through the Forest of Mirkwood, as it was called Greenwood back then, for trade between Khazad-dûm and the Iron Hills. Durin's folk later colonized the Grey Mountains. When men first came west into Rovanion and Eriador, the men provided food while the dwarves built, made roads, mined, and made tools and weapons for the men. In the Second Age, the elves of Eregion settled to the west of Khazad-dûm. Both the elves and the dwarves had great friendship, especially between King Celebrimbor and Durin III. The runes of the Door of Moria were made by Celebrimbor in friendship with the dwarves. After Eregion was destroyed by Sauron's armies, the doors of Khazad-dûm were shut, and the dwarves hid within until they aided the elves and men against Sauron in the War of the Last Alliance. During the reign of Durin VI, the Longbeards of Khazad-dûm had awoken a Balrog, a demon of Morgoth. This Balrog slew Durin VI, and Durin's folk went from the Iron Hills to the Blue Mountains, searching for a lasting home, and their history was filled with strife and wandering. They eventually made a home in Erebor at the Lonely Mountain, but the dragon Smaug devastated the realm and ruled there for 150 years. That is, until Thorin's company reclaimed Erebor and the Longbeards finally found permanent homes in the wide lands of Middle-earth. It was not until the time of Durin VII in the Fourth Age that Moria was reclaimed and Khazad-dûm was rebuilt, restoring the ancient kingdom of the dwarves. The most notable dwarves of the Longbeards, apart from Durin, were Gimli, one of the Fellowship of the Ring and the founder of the Glittering Caves, the dwarves of Thorin's company, Dain II Ironfoot, Lord of the Iron Hills, Thror I, founder of Erebor, Thrain II, father of Thorin, who was captured in Dol Guldur where his dwarven ring was lost, and Thror II, who returned to Erebor after the loss of the Grey Mountains, and was the grandfather of Thorin II Oakenshield, the leader of Thorin's company. Of the Seven Durins, Durin I was the eldest of all the dwarves to awaken and founded Khazad-dûm beneath the Misty Mountains. Durin II lived during the First Age or early Second Age, and nothing is known about his reign. Durin III ruled in the 16th century of the Second Age. During his time, the friendship with the elves of Eregion was made, and Durin III was given the first of the 7 dwarven rings. Durin III died in isolation when the doors of Khazad-dûm were shut amid Sauron's invasion. Durin IV was the king of the dwarves during the War of the Last Alliance. Nothing was known of Durin V's reign. He lived from late in the Second Age to the early Third Age. Durin VI ruled from an unknown time during the Third Age to the year 1980 of the Third Age. Near the end of his reign, the dwarves encountered a Balrog of Morgoth. The Balrog slew Durin VI. The Balrog was called ever after Durin's Bane. Durin's son, Nain I, was slain after, leaving his grandson Thrain I to lead Durin's folk as the survivors fled from Khazad-dûm. The Longbeards refused to take the name of Durin for their rulers from 1981 of the Third Age until after 171 of the Fourth Age. Durin VII was the grandson of Dain II Ironfoot and a descendant of Thorin III Stonehelm. Durin VII restored the ancient kingdom of Khazad-dûm and fulfilled the expeditions previously undertaken, earning his title. In Beleriand, during the First Age, there was a group of dwarves called the Petty Dwarves who lived in Beleriand and were exiled for their evil deeds from the rest of their kindred. These were hunted by the Sindarin elves of Doriath, and not to the disapproval of the other dwarven kindreds. Most notable of the Petty Dwarves was Mim, who betrayed Turin Turambar and was slain by Hurin of the House of Hador. During the early parts of the Third Age, in some places it was said that wicked dwarves made alliances with orcs. These most likely came from the eastern mansions among the 4 kindreds of the Orokarni. Dwarves are honorable in their work and their friendships, but are slow to forgive and also very stubborn, while being subject to greed and bloodlust as their flaws. Dwarven homelands were always being uprooted, and even the longest-lasting realm of the dwarves, Khazad-dûm, was undone not from without, but from within. Although their greed can be great, they show dedication and commitment in spite of their endless struggles throughout the history of Middle-earth. To befriend a dwarf is to have a friendship free of doubt or betrayal, and someone who will stick with you to the end.